Yes, hello. Uh, I hope I'm audible. Yes, I hope I'm audible. Yes. Good evening. We apologize for the delay. Uh, Kindly remain seated. We'll begin the program shortly. Thank you. Yes, we'll start the program in next 5 to 10 minutes, so kindly remain seated. Yeah, thank you. And again, sorry for the delay. Yes, good evening. We'll be starting in the next couple of minutes. So, thank you so much for your patience. Yes, so good evening again. So, we shall start the celebration of the National Science Day right now. Yeah. And thank you again for your patience. Science is a way of thinking, a cultivated disposition of mind, than a mere body of knowledge, says Carl Sagan, one of the famous astronomers. Namaskar and good evening to everyone. I'm Dr. Prasanjit Tribhuvan, Assistant Professor at the School of Liberal Arts, IIT Jodhpur. I extend a warm welcome to you on the occasion of the National Science Day. We celebrate National Science Day on 20th February every year to commemorate the discovery of the Raman effect by Sir Chandrasekhar Venkata Raman, an Indian physicist, on 20th February 1928. This discovery was a breakthrough in the field of science and won Sir Raman the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1930. National Science Day is celebrated to recognize and appreciate the significant contributions of scientists and researchers to society, to promote scientific temper and encourage scientific thinking, and to inspire and encourage young students to pursue a career in science. It also serves as a reminder of the importance of scientific discoveries and the impact that they have on our lives. On this special day, I wish that science continues to inspire and motivate people to explore this great world around us. May we continue to celebrate the achievements of our scientists and researchers who have contributed to our understanding of this universe. As we commemorate this day, we have planned an institute lecture by eminent physicist Professor Surojit Sen, who will be talking on the topic, Nurturing Curious Kids, a Focus on India. It is a great day for all of us that we have amongst us Professor Surajit Sen. He's an internationally known expert in the area of nonlinear dynamics and non-equilibrium statistical physics. Professor Sen keeps a keen interest in raising awareness about science and maths in children and youth from the underprivileged community. In recent years, he has been involved in small-scale experimental work to determine which approaches may be appropriate to educate the nearly 3 billion youth in the developing world. On this occasion, we also have amongst us Professor Kuldeep Singh, Dean Academics at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, or AIIMS, Jodhpur. It's an absolute privilege for us to have you, sir, and Professor Sen with us today on this occasion. I now request Professor Neeraj Jain to kindly extend floral facilitation to the special guests. I invite Professor Sen and Professor Singh to kindly come on stage. Yeah. I will now take the privilege to invite Professor Jain to kindly deliver the welcome address.
Good evening. It's indeed my privilege to have all of you here on the Science Day and with an eminent speaker, Professor Sen, in the presence of Dr. Singh from AIIMS Jodhpur. When I heard the title of the talk and then I started reading Professor Sen's biography from top, I was wondering where is the connection? Is there some mistake somewhere? Did we have the wrong title? And then I kept on reading, and as I went toward the end of his biography, then I realized that there cannot be anybody better than him to deliver this talk. It's really great to have him here. We are running very late for certain reasons, so I'll not take much longer time. I'm not even going to read all the achievements which Professor Sen has. You have this biography. Would you like to introduce briefly? You already done that. Okay. So apologies for that. So I would like to right away invite Professor Sen for his lecture. Thank you, Professor Sen.
We would require a microphone for Professor Sen. So before Professor Sen starts his address for the day, I request Professor Kuldeep Singh, who has kindly agreed to be here today. Sir, if you can just deliver a short address. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. This is my privilege to listen to Professor Sen and what he's doing in the work in that area as a part of, he's going to deliver his talk as part of the National Science Day. I would like to say something about the National Science Day today. That is, the theme of this Science Day is Global Science for Global Well-being. And so that means that there is a lot of thinking beyond the science goes from the labs to the institute, to the periphery or the community. So that is the well-being of the whole of the human beings can be maintained or attained. And so it also goes beyond the local level to a global level also. The global does not mean that we have to go outside, but also have the collaboration. So I think the new thing which is this theme says is that there is a collaboration between different types of scientific institution, whether it is a biotechnology or it is a social science or a physical science or medical science. And that's why there is a collaboration is the most important thing which can elevate the level of the science to a very higher degree, higher standard. And as we know that to nurture the minds of the young starts not only after birth, it starts from the intrauterine period. And not only from the intrauterine period during pregnancy, it starts before that also. That is when the child is growing and he is in the teenage group. He is the most inspired person who can learn from the environment. He or she can have the experience of the background. From the school information, he can make new judgments. And that's why he can carry that information for the future. So this is known as intergenerational cycle. From the pregnancy to the child growth, becoming teenager, again the parents or the couple, and then thinking about the child's growth. So there is a huge cycle and it is all interconnected. And that's why the science goes beyond just the specific age for the adult. It moves to the young adult also up to age of 25 years. And so that now we can listen to Professor Sen about his views about how this can be achieved and how we can nurture the young minds for scientific temperament. And as we know that there is a long period of development of a human being. That is, the neurons are already formed by the 12 weeks of pregnancy. That is, in the first trimester, all the neurons are formed, they are fixed. It is only in the first 2 years the myelination occurs. That is, the transmission capacity of the neuron develops. And then there is a period when there is just growth, physical growth, and learning from the experience. And then comes another phase which is known as the teenager. And teenagers also, there are two phases. The one is early teenage phase and the second is the late teenage phase. So 10 to 14 years is another window of opportunity. So we can say there are two windows of opportunities. Is the first 1,000 days of life. And the second is the 10 to 14 years of life. Where if we stimulate the mind of the young, it is going to deliver the rich dividend later on. After 25 years, the things becomes a little fixed and they become more rigid as the age advances. And that's why it is very important that we have to target the young minds. And this is what is the talk Professor Sen is going to deliver. So without wasting much time, I would request Dr. Sen to deliver his talk on the nurturing the young mind. Thank you.
Let me see if I can successfully get started. Can you hear me? Yes, loud enough? Okay. Is that better? Okay, thank you. Okay. So thank you. It's such a privilege to be here. Maybe I should reduce this. So when I found out that I was going to give this talk, it was not very long back, and I was very worried because this was not in my plan. But at the same time, it was a fantastic honor, and I realized that I had to make the best of it, right? So I decided to talk about something that I care about deeply. As a father, as a teacher, as a human being, I guess, and took on this topic of nurturing curious kids, in particular with a focus on India. Now, the issue of kids, I purposefully use the word kids to keep the age range very informal. So there are a variety of definitions, as Professor Singh pointed out, and when I say kids, it's under 25. But I've been told that even at 35, you can remain a kid. So all of you who are in your mid-30s or late 30s, you are still a kid. But by and large, when you are 20, 25, you're still pretty much within the range of being a kid. So I'll come to that later. I actually won't belabor that point. But much of that came from the interactions I had with this gentleman. Oops. Somehow it doesn't seem to be working. Did the battery go off?
No, sir. Actually, it's working.
Okay. Did I do something there? Achha. Okay, thanks. Oops. Sorry about that. Hopefully I didn't blow this. Anyway, so no, the laser pointer is not really working on this. Anyway, that's fine. So I just had a very interesting interaction with this gentleman here, Dan Siegel, who is quite a well-known author. He's a pediatric psychiatrist, and I had heard about Dan Siegel from a psychology colleague of mine, and I was essentially told that this guy is very good in talking about kids. So I was organizing a particular session on physics education at UCLA, and I had invited Siegel along with some other people, and that's how I got to know him. And I wanted to start with a quote from him, where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. The particular work that I'm going to talk about, it's not really formal work in terms of a paper. Why is that happening?
That mic is on. Two mics are on.
Okay. Okay, thanks. It's not really work in terms of a paper. It's work I did as a Jefferson Science Fellow of the National Academies in the US. And I spent that year at the US Agency for International Development, USAID. This is the agency of the government that basically gives aid to all the developing countries of the world. And as an academic, I was a senior science advisor, and one of the roles I picked up, which I thought was of interest to me, was to figure out how development works, and if it works well at all. And I'll tell you a little bit about that answer and the relation of that with nurturing curious kids. So that's the reason why I'm trying to acknowledge the Jefferson Science Fellowship, and also some people, Nilangshu Gain and Rehana Sultan of Swanirvar, which is an NGO, which I'll talk about in some detail. So moving on, one of the things that was very important about what Raman pointed out is the issue of curiosity. So Raman believed that if you ask the right questions, nature will open the doors to her secrets. So this is a very profound point, because the point in question is not about whether you're curious, but whether you ultimately zero in on asking the right question, right? That's the point. Oh. Sorry. Okay, thank you. So, so this is one of the things that he pointed out that's been talked about. And the issue of curiosity and the issue of asking the right question turns out to be a very, very important issue in terms of how we develop. So there is a fair amount of work, by the way, on curiosity. For example, there is this paper that I stumbled into, The Psychology and Neuroscience of Curiosity. This is a paper by Celeste Kidd, who is a faculty member at Berkeley, and Benjamin Hayden, who is from University of Minnesota. And the summary kind of says the following: curiosity is a basic element of our cognition, yet its biological function, mechanisms, and neural underpinning remain poorly understood. It is nonetheless a motivator for learning, influential in decision-making, and crucial for healthy development. And then finally, after a few lines, they point out, we propose that rather than worry about defining curiosity, it is more helpful to consider the motivations for information-seeking behavior and to study it in whatever ethological context, whatever that is. The point is that the fact that we are curious individuals turns out to be a very important thing. That's what they are saying. Curiosity also has health benefits, apparently. 6 surprising benefits of curiosity. So this is an article from a grad student at the time, Emily Campbell at Berkeley. This was in 2015. And then there is a real paper here in Motivation and Emotion in 2007 that says curiosity and pathways to well-being and meaning in life, traits, states, and everyday behaviors. So I'd like to broaden the issue of science, scientific inquiry, scientific curiosity, to the broader issue of curiosity, because I've reached a stage in life where I can't separate science from non-science anymore. They have all become jumbled up. That may not be so for you, but I'm sorry that has happened to me. So this is the story of Arvind Gupta. Arvind Gupta is an IIT-trained engineer. Arvind Gupta is a really fun guy, and at some point in his career, he decided that it was not worth being the engineer he was, but being a real engineer in making toys from trash and making them useful and interesting and fun stuff for the kids. So if you haven't watched his TED Talks, if you haven't watched his website, YouTube site, which is filled with videos, I strongly suggest that you can entertain yourself by watching Arvind Gupta. He's absolutely hilarious. He's at the same time really deep, and this is a great way to make one curious. That doesn't mean you understand everything he's saying. Some of his experiments are remarkably complex, but the fact that he's able to take some toys, take some matchsticks, take some balloons, take some straws, and make what he can, that can excite somebody who is just a street kid with no education. That is remarkable. That is the firing that we need to do. But we don't even know how to do it. That's the unfortunate fact. And it's not in India alone. It's across the world. We don't really know how to do it. And look at these kids. I mean, how can you not feel happy about how excited they are? This particular kid on the left, this kid is so happy because there are no toys where she used to play. The toys have been replaced by cardboard boxes. And guess what? This kid actually finds it more stimulating. That's what this article is about. Just imagine, the cardboard boxes are more stimulating than toys. That's the point. And the kid on the right, 5 months old, is teething. And this particular kid has figured out that chewing on my paper is more fun than on the teething toy, because that's harder. It's curiosity, just checking out the softness of the paper. Of course, I had to pull out the paper from her tongue later on. But anyway, so kids are very curious. They do weird things, right? And we often wonder why they're doing that. That's not common behavior. But that is the behavior that is normal to them. They are being curious. They are discovering. And this discovery process in itself is amazing. So let's get a little bit more serious. Let's go back to the late 1920s, early 1930s. Around that time, there was an essay that appeared. It's called Usefulness of Useless Knowledge. Okay? So it's a very important, actually, piece of work by this fellow called Abraham Flexner. So those of you who go to doctors, and I'm sure all of you do, like me, the current medical curriculum in the US was drawn up in the early to mid-1930s by Abraham Flexner. So the medical schools basically follow what Flexner laid out at that time. So he was a very influential person at the time. Flexner was also one of the founding fathers of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, which I'm sure you have heard about because of the influential role it has played in the history of many things. So he points out, is it not a curious fact that in a world steeped in irrational hatreds, which threaten civilization itself, men and women, old and young, detach themselves wholly or partly from the angry current of daily life to devote themselves to the cultivation of beauty, to the extension of knowledge, to the cure of disease, to the amelioration of suffering, just as though fanatics were not simultaneously engaged in spreading pain, ugliness, and whatever else. So the whole point is that curiosity is something very, very innate to us. But it's not curiosity alone. It's not curiosity alone. C.N. Yang, who is a very famous physicist, just turned 101. He won his Nobel Prize in his 30s. C.N. Yang said something very interesting on the occasion of his 60th birthday. So I had captured this as a graduate student. It says in every field of creative activity, it is one's taste, together with ability, temperament, and opportunity, that determines one's style, and through it, one's contribution. One's taste. That taste and style have so much to do with one's contribution in physics. May sound strange at first. Since physics is supposed to deal objectively with the physical universe. But the physical universe has structure. And one's perceptions of the structure, one's partiality to some of its characteristics, and aversion to others, are precisely the elements that make up one's taste. So therefore, our curiosity with our taste plays a critical role in how we see nature, how we understand. By the way, it also says that learning as a process is very individualized. We each learn differently. So in a classroom, when I teach 200 kids, or when you teach 200 kids, each one of those 200 kids are learning differently. They're seeing you differently. They're sitting literally in different universes. So it turns out that it's very, very important to recognize this, to keep it in mind to the extent we can, right? So some young discoverers you may have heard of. We as a society would not be where we are without the innovations of the youth. You have heard of Pascal, I'm sure. Addition and subtraction machine, the calculator is Pascal. Pascal was 19 years old. This was 1642. For all of us who have vision issues, Braille developed basically the Braille script in 1825. He was a teenager. He was 16 years old. Philo Farnsworth is to whom you owe your TV. That was 1921. Okay? The first sailboard, this young guy, 12 years old, 1958, Peter Chilvers. This girl, Ria Karumanchi, she came up, oh my goodness, sorry about that. She came up with the smart cane, which is for blind people. Neil Deshmukh, it continues. There are so many young people. I'm particularly intrigued by the work of Fionn Ferreira, the second but one. Use of ferrofluid in water bodies to attract microplastics, and then use magnetic forces to remove the microplastics. We don't have too many technologies to remove plastics. So this person obviously has made some progress. So in other words, civilization won't be where it is now without youth, right? That's what we are learning, which is shocking, because we think, at least the way education is structured, is we work to train the kids. Well, to some degree, the kids might be there to train us as well. So let's focus on India, because India is a very interesting country, obviously. It's a very, very unique country. So a quick look. About 325 languages. It's a very ancient country. So that's a mind-boggling number in its own right. About 20,000 dialects. Independence from Britain in 1947 after 200 years. So we were in pretty bad shape for 200 years. 28 states, 8 union territories. As of Saturday, the population is 1.415 billion. But India's population is 66% rural. 66% rural. There's no other country in the world which is even remotely close to us that's 66% rural. Just to give you a comparison, United States, which seems very rural, has a very urbanized infrastructure. So urbanized, in fact, that US is 83% urban. It's a very different country structurally. So Egypt, Kyrgyz Republic, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, these are some of the more rural countries, but it's not really as rural as we are. And we have 700 million young people below 25. That's the way I've considered it. Worldwide, it's about 3 billion. So we are talking some really big numbers here. And these are our citizens of the late 21st century and 22nd century. These are the people who are going to be important players in the world of that time. Like it or not, we won't be here. So, and these are bright kids. So I'll tell you this little story before I dig deep. So this is actually in a juvenile detention facility, actually in a jail. This is a classroom. These are young kids. Their ages are between 6 and about 16 or 17. They are all detained. Most of them are detained because they have been abandoned. Once abandoned, they end up in the brothels. The brothels are raided, then they end up in this facility. This is actually in Salt Lake in Calcutta. And here is a class going on. These are incredible people who give their lives to basically save the lives of these kids. All right? So it's very important that the intervention that happens at this stage happens properly. Because at 18, the system sets them free. And they go back again to the brothels. Because typically, the money they make is enormous. And then, of course, as they age, the money runs out, and they mostly commit suicides. They fall victim to mental health issues. So one of these kids asked me about global warming. I was just standing there saying hello to them. So this is the kind of stuff that goes on in their minds, right? But society has written them off because we don't know what to do with them. We haven't really given it that much consideration. But what if we could pull together the curiosity and the creativity of the world's nearly 3 billion youth who have their unique talents, creativities, history, societies, experiences, and observations? What would tomorrow be like then? How would it be? What kind of a world would we be living in? And is that even doable? And if it's not doable, why is it not doable? What is it that's standing in the way other than our will? So this is one of the things I would like to focus on, because this ultimately boils down to us not having to do a lot. We just need to turn on their curiosities, because then their engines take over. So the question is, can we do that? So let's look at Bengal, because I'll just whittle down the problem now to just Bengal, one state, because we need some details. And I can give you a little bit of details in the state. So Bengal is about, it's a fairly large, fairly populated state, as you know. I'll basically focus on the part of Bengal which is North 24 Parganas, which is, I think, number 14 out there, if you can see the map. It's bordering Bangladesh. It's just north of the Sundarban region. A little bit also on the South 24 Parganas. The North 24 Parganas, by the way, is the most populated district in India. So it's a very interesting district. And I'll focus on what's going on there. Here are some kids doing some song and dance as part of their curricula. And the face of rural Bengal and the history and culture of Bengal. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, you probably know this better than I do, but I didn't know it at all. Rural society can literally be classified into 4 different strata, if you will. The affluent group makes about 2 to 3 lakhs a month. So they're pretty rich. And they have all the creature comforts of life. Their kids go to private schools. Their kids go to college. They do pretty well. The upper middle class, about 35% of the population, many government sector employees, private sector employees, many are landowners. They have good affordability. They have internet connectivity. They have TVs. They have cars. Most of the creature comforts. Maybe not as much as the more affluent top 10% does. The lower middle class, that's a different India. Incomes are low. Class consciousness sets in. Many of them are farmers. Some of them are quite educated. They're often unemployed, underemployed, depressed. All kinds of problems start popping up. Most of them own cell phones, obviously, but that doesn't mean they own smartphones. It makes a difference. TV and motorbikes. And by the time you get to the lowest level, that's about 25% of the population. They are the day laborers, the bricklayers. There's no job security, but overall, with 2 couples working, a relatively steady income at 10 to 15K per month. So this is the story of rural Bengal right now. This is stuff from the last year and a half to now, approximately, from people on the ground. And of course, you know that Bengal has a rich history of personalities in literature, in music, in science, in the freedom struggle and everything, right? Several important contributors in terms of Nobel winners. Muhammad Yunus, Bangladesh, introduced the Grameen Bank that has revolutionized the rural business issues and so on around the world. So lots of stuff has been happening in Bengal, and the reason why I'm pointing it out is because this rural population is aware of that. They know that. In fact, many of India's revolutionaries came from rural Bengal. They didn't come from Calcutta. And these people are darn proud of it. If you talk to them, they'll say, oh, so-and-so was from that home right there. Okay? So you feel their passion, you feel their pride, you feel their excitement in that. Education in rural areas. There are many problems. There are no solutions, literally. So let me tell you a little bit about the ground reality right now. Most of you know this better than I do, but I still thought I'll start here. So primary school, grades 1 through 5, secondary school 6 through 10, higher secondary is 10 to 12. That's the classification. Almost everyone reaches 8th grade because there are no exams, right? So you basically breeze through till 8th grade, and then you have exams, and people just go away. That's what happens. No assessment. Many schools have large student-to-teacher ratios. Only a small number perform at the grade level. So a typical 5th or 6th grader may not be able to do any significant math or read or write. That's very unfortunate, but that's also the ground reality. Learning is, of course, strictly controlled by the government boards. I would encourage you, if you can read Bengali, to look at some of those books. I have. They were very bad. There is no room for innovation. That's completely killed off. Problems include rote learning, uninspiring textbooks, obviously, as I told you. Teachers have limited freedom to teach. I interact very closely with Rehana. I mentioned her name. She's a Bengali teacher, and most of the time she tells me of what she could not teach that week because she had the kids ready to go, she was ready to go, the principal wouldn't let her. It's a typical story. Unfortunate. Very few lower middle class and poor children complete high school. Even fewer enter college. It's a very depressing scenario. And on top of that, Bengal has about 15,000 suicides per year. India has 17% of world suicide rate. Why? Depression. So I asked the question why. I got one straight, one-word answer: depression. That's it. Mental health. By the way, one point I wanted to make is that this kind of granular data is really lacking in most areas, not only of India, but also of other nations. But this granular data is extremely powerful. It's extremely valuable because ultimately it becomes a way to move political will. But this data is not there. There's very, very, very limited data that's there. About 2.7 million enrolled in grade 1, of which 1.1 million passed out of grade 10 last year. This year, that number is 0.64 million. COVID, economic downturn, not really sure what all the issues are. Less than 500,000 seats, million seats are available for college kids. So if the first year college, basically 500,000 seats. So 6 million are entering grade 1, 500,000 can potentially go to college. And the education system ultimately probably kills the curiosity. These kids get a degree, most of them don't get a job, depression starts, you have suicide problems, you have drug problems, and all kinds of obvious problems that happen everywhere else as well. So one hypothesis that was coined was humans are smart, can they self-teach if they have access to teaching materials? It's a very attractive hypothesis. And this kind of hypothesis was worked on by many. And one of the big names is this gentleman, Seymour Papert from MIT. And basically, I have summarized in red here. Computers can help children learn. Availability of online learning is there. Availability of language translation is there. Deep penetration of internet connectivity is there in most places. So can this result in possible educational gains? So this has been a major effort. This has been an effort that's been going on for a long, long time. It started back in the late 80s, early 90s time frame. And you know, India has done a lot of work on that. So in fact, this gentleman is very famous, Swami Manohar. He's the developer of the Simputer, which is the very inexpensive computer. But they all have technical issues. They are prone to, basically virus-type attacks. They are not that cheap. I mean, it's essentially impossible to make them within something like $100 or something. And even if you make it for $100, what happens? They don't last forever. You can't recycle them. So they have their own problems. And so we run into not only enormous costs. For example, for India, the cost may be $70 to $80 billion to give a computer to every child. Even that's a very inexpensive computer if that were available, and that's not. So basically, I'm trying to tell you that this approach may have its value in some places, but it probably won't have great dividends in our country. So anyway, this is more of the same, trying to tell you that there are other countries that have actually taken this seriously, small countries like Nicaragua and so on. And there has been some level of, at least some claims of some success, but they are not really serious publications or so on from which one can make much inferences. So has schooling always been this way? If you go back about 4,500 years, that's easy to find. I'm sure there was schooling even way before that, but it's not so easy to find. Go back 4,500 years ago to Egypt, and Egypt had a very nice education system for the elite. It worked really well. And the non-elite basically went on to various kinds of skilled labor-based work in those days. So it worked. In whatever way it worked, it worked. Today, one may want to do skill development, but with pathways to higher education. In the US, this is very, very common. There are the community colleges, which are also there in the rural areas. So if somebody wants to get back into the education track, one can actually go to the community colleges and start taking courses, essentially enroll in some program, and then slowly carve their way up back to higher education if they want to. Pathways here are a little bit more contorted, but in the US, the pathways are relatively straightforward. You can go to a community college, you can take courses, you may be working, you take courses in the evening in your own time, and then once you shore up enough credits, once you have done well enough, you get to the university, you can get back on track. So it works. But that kind of a thing, there's plenty of examples where it has worked. So now let's raise the bigger question. Can schools be spaces for young kids to enjoy learning, social relationship building, learning to care for one another, become self-confident, humble, just good human beings, just like what we would like our kids to be? Are schools able to accomplish that? Some schools do, but most really fall short. Can schools be inviting spaces for adolescent girls? We have a huge problem with adolescent girls. Forget about curiosity. They don't even want to come to school. I'll come to why that is the case. Can schools be spaces where a disabled girl can independently use a toilet? The fact is that today, in 2023, we don't have a toilet for a disabled girl to use independently. There is not even one design that is working because they're difficult to design. So I'd asked the USAID engineering group what they do when they install toilets in various parts of the world, especially in Africa and so on. Oh, they said, we just put a standard porta potty there. That was the response. And I asked him, is that really what it is? And the answer was yes, that's exactly what we do. We don't have the budget or the technology for this. I doubt they don't have the budget, but that was the claim. Can schools be spaces where gifted teachers who love young kids would come to work? Can we make them excel, be creative? How can we do science if this doesn't happen? How can these brains not be drawn into the game? Then I'll talk about Swanirvat, this NGO that I work very closely with, and I've done it for many, many years, at least 2.5 decades now. So this is in North 24 Parganas. It's in a village called Adhar Manik. And the kind of stuff I'm showing is for 117 schools. There are about 400 plus government teachers, about 10,000 kids. So this is a small experiment. Question is, does it work? Does it help? Help these kids get excited. Simple stuff. You can see some teachers here doing arts and crafts training. Many of them have scissors, colored papers, and threads, and so on. They're actually having a lot of fun. I've seen some of these. I've visited them. On the right, you have them basically disinfecting the campus because they had a flood. Okay, the kids are doing it. They're trained to do it. They're not being mollycoddled here. Amazing, isn't it? I showed you that picture. That's a Sahitya Sabha in progress, actually. So they're actually acting it out. They have studied, they have memorized their part, they're doing it. Here you have more or less a community event. Teachers, NGO workers, government officials, they are interacting and exchanging ideas. That's the way it's supposed to be. It doesn't often happen that way. But they, of course, are very experienced at this. They have worked at it for a long, long time. On the top left, these are juvenile delinquents again. But these are the boys. Most of them end up here because of petty stuff. They may have stolen a purse. Then they get locked up, and there is no way to get out. They get out at 18. By that time, they become hardened criminals. And they go back to jail again. So here, the goal is to make them at least into gardeners and having skills like that. So actually, many of them become trained gardeners. That's not a bad start. Not a bad start. You're getting them curious. They will become each of them will become individual gardeners if they succeed with their own talents, own skills. Mendel just played like that too. So this particular person, Sujit Sinha, again an IITian, Sujit is the one who founded Swanirvar. And Sujit did his master's in chemistry from IIT Kanpur. He got a PhD from Princeton in 1984. He used to work at Bell Labs, came back, started Swanirvar, and that was in 1989. And 34 years later, it's alive and well, and it's doing amazingly well. Sujit was a professor at Azim Premji for a while, but I think he has just finished that up. But what I want to point out is the work he did was so visionary. So youth development programs that he started back in the late 80s, early 90s, which matured over time, this kind of work is now actually being done across the world under the banner of what we call positive youth development. So what are they doing? Swanirvar's approach has been to train the students in skills that can help them become valuable citizens, that can help them become entrepreneurs, that can help them become politicians, that can help them become, this and that, plumbers, electricians, what have you. And then they have this group of kids called Kishore Kishori Bahini. The idea is that these kids, they not only go through the training process, they then become the trainers for the next generation. They essentially become the most prized citizens of the rural communities they come from. And there is a lot of trust building that has happened within the community for this to work. So I'll tell you a little bit about this Kishore Kishori Bahini's work. Here, for example, you can see them making charts and stuff. Map making is what they're doing. This is from actual surveillance work that they do in the villages to figure out, for example, rainfall, vegetation changes, is there any new species coming up, keeping track of that, any invasive species comes up, keeping track of that, some building killed off some plants, keeping track of those things. So make the learning experience here understandable and relevant for the students. That's their goal. So these young kids are actually at work in the villages trying to change lives. The program focused on youth education that ran between 2004 and 2016. It reached about 120,000 kids in about 80 villages. By the way, the program continues. I just have the numbers until 2016. There were a few pauses because of funding issues, but by and large, they continue. You're probably wondering, how expensive is all this? I have a surprise for you. So here is a list of stuff they do. still do. Common health issues like diarrhea. They get trained on how to manage diarrhea. On sanitation issues, on nutrition issues. These are things that in the urban world we take for granted, right? Many of us do anyway. First aid, life and sex education, disinfecting tube wells, that's where the water comes from. Kitchen gardens, they're cheap, they're healthy, they're great. Nursery for medicinal herbs. They grow the nursery, they maintain them. They learn about the plants. They propagate the whole system. Fruit tree grafting. Nursery for vegetables and trees, conducting surveys and analyzing data, like I told you. Practical environmental studies. Land use map. Poultry immunization. They actually make money immunizing poultry. And you're talking kids, 10 years old, 15 years old. Vaccinating livestock against common diseases. Anti-superstition laws, food processing. Learning about how the panchayat system works. You probably know that the village panchayat system is extremely complicated. If you know cities, towns, and villages, that is not going to work. It's really complicated. So, recycling paper and plastic to make decorative items. Small stuff, nothing big. Bookbinding. They're very, very good at puppetry because they get trained in puppetry. That becomes an art form. Puppet shows are bigger than movie shows in these rural areas. Here you can see them vaccinating some kind of a chicken or something. So surveys and their analysis, existence of toilet facilities, tube wells, daily temperature and rainfall, incidence of diarrhea and worm infestation, domestic animals, crops. They also run their own village libraries. They keep track of potholes on the village roads. I mean, most of this was Shujit's brainchild. Carrying out awareness campaigns on subjects like arsenic in drinking water. They also have their own ways of taking arsenic out that Shujit and his people figured out. Livening up panchayat meetings with cultural program. You just name it, they do everything. And you can read the rest. So I don't want to go on and on. The point I want to say is that this is a great way to start to deal with kids who are essentially going to be betrayed by the system. They are not going to be able to get far above 8th grade. They are the ones who are going to get depressed. They are the ones who are going to lose their self-worth. So this is a way that they have been very successful at dealing with these issues. However, I can show you this particular graph, for example, this impact of this Kishore Kishori Bahini program in rural life. So here you can see, farmers who own land. So parents, obviously, there were more parents owning land. Now less of the Kishore Kishori Bahini members, ex-members own land. That's on the leftmost chart. It has fallen by quite a bit. Farmers who work on lease land, again, it has fallen. Small business, actually, they have grown a little bit. More of these younger people are taking on small businesses. Government sector service has gone up substantially because they're a little bit more educated. Service in the unorganized sector has also gone up many-fold. So things are changing. There's some impact, and these are rough measurements, but this is not that rough. It's data from about 7 villages, 250 youth. These are the juvenile delinquent children. Many of them are Rohingya kids, by the way. They ended up in India, and after that, the parents, typically the mom more than the dad, was sent to some kind of prison that's outside Calcutta. I forget the place, and the kid ends up here. I think they're separated. So I met at least 4 or 5 of them in this group. The ones on the right, they basically are in the juvenile delinquent facility. Here is one of the super smart girls who was asking me about global warming, putting Rakhi on me. This was several years ago. And this is the vegetable garden that they made in the prison campus. This was, I forget the name of the place. It's near Barashat, Calcutta. So there are critical challenges, though. I told you the good thing, but there are some critical issues. You see, 2.8 million adolescent girls miss school every month and eventually drop out of school, mostly in rural UP. 2.8 million. Government approved funding to install 1,000 electric sanitary pad vending and disposal machines in schools in UP. It did not work because they use joule heating. They use electricity to burn up the sanitary pads. The schools have an electricity budget. Most people don't realize that electricity is far more expensive in rural India than in urban India. So essentially what happened was in many schools, it blew the school's electricity budget. The principals turned it off. It doesn't work anymore. The girls still don't come to school, and the money is gone. Why? Because nobody bothered to look at the details. And this is the story of development, not in India, worldwide. We throw money and think it's somebody else's problem. That's the unfortunate fact. Schools in some areas are now reluctant to use these machines. Not surprisingly, they've wisened up. They realize it doesn't work. But you can use this terracotta urn system that's long been around, and it works quite well. And it's far, far less expensive, and obviously environmentally far more friendly. What about disabled girls? Remember I mentioned that problem? So here you see a Hindustan Times coverage on that from about 6 years ago, where the story about not having toilets for disabled girls has become an enormous problem. They simply can't be part of the school system because they're disabled. I don't drink water when I'm outside the house so that I don't need to visit the toilet. It is common for women with disabilities to suffer from kidney stones because either they don't drink enough water or they don't relieve themselves for long hours. How unfortunate is that in the 21st century that we have to deal with it? So Professor Malik is a friend of mine. He was my colleague in Buffalo before, moved to Georgia Tech. Then he was a provost of one of the universities in Gujarat. In spite of a lot of money being spent, there is no operational toilet unit designed for disabled women. He's a pioneer in the world in designing toilets for disabled people. But he pointed out there are some serious issues, and he gave me a list of measurements of why these are serious issues. I didn't put it up here because that will be too technical. And as I said, USAID still uses porta potty, right? The blue porta potties, or whatever the color is in India. Some experiments are in progress to make the kids more curious. But one of the things that I want to point out, and this is not often talked about enough, is that you can't make a child curious without taking care of the community in which the child lives. If the mother is unwell, the child is not going to be able to study. If electricity doesn't work, that's not going to help. If the child is hungry, that's not going to help. If the father is drunk at home, that's not going to help. These are not side issues. These may be a little bit of a side issue in the urban world. But in the rural world, these are issues that are part of the education problem, part of making them curious. You can't separate. You can't say, I'm going to give so-and-so money to make sure that these kids go to school and get a high school diploma. It doesn't work that way. What did COVID do? What did COVID teach us? Kids didn't go to school for 2 years. Then they came back after 2 grades higher without mastering what was 2 grades lower. Because people have to meet deadlines. It's crazy. It makes no sense. But look at this. This mental health problem for women, we were able to deal with it in a following way. We just started a cafe for these women once a week. We invited women, young women in the 16 to 40 age group. We invited them basically for some tea and samosa, just to have fun, talk to their neighbors and friends, small group. There were some jewelry making classes that were organized. There was a village woman who's a bit of a counselor, not a formal counselor. And that's been running for like close to a year now. We are trying to grow it, very successful, no problems, women are happy. It has now become the place where they exchange seeds and so on. It's helping them in their farming. So a simple experiment like that worked. We worked so hard to try to get counselors from the city, trained counselors. Not only was that an expensive problem, The counselors had difficulty coming to the villages, which are 30, 40 kilometers. That can take several hours, as you know. And furthermore, why would a rural woman confide to somebody they don't know? It's unlikely they ever would, right? These people in Swanirvar, they were training nurses' assistants. There's a great need for nurses' assistants. Nurses are too expensive oftentimes. But nurses' assistants can get the job done. Most of the job's done. They trained 137 a couple of years ago, of which 135 continue to be gainfully employed. 2 are not, by choice. So 100% employment. Right now they're running another program combining North and South 24 Parganas young women, basically 17, 18, 20-year-old women. And they take a 3-hour journey one way and a 3-hour journey back just to go through this training process for 6 to 8 months. And once they're done, they get a job. Their families are secure for the rest of their lives. That's the difference it makes. Their children go to school. We started this curiosity camp thing. This just started. But we started it in a way that is reasonably intelligent. We coupled it with the schools, with the school buy-in. So chapter by chapter stuff, the study, let's say in the science books. We have Arvind Gupta type experiments, puppet shows and so on lined up for chapter by chapter, coordination has been done. So the kids are having fun, they're also learning the school stuff. Principals are happy, teachers are happy, we are happy. It's just started. I can give you a report sometime later. The whole farming community in this part of Bengal collapsed. Why? This is the only part of the world where there are 4 growing seasons. There are not too many parts of the world there are 4 growing seasons. Only part of the world. You can look it up. I'm not exaggerating. Why wouldn't women who are regular farmers there farm? Basically because the middlemen were taking out the money. So what we decided to do is we set up agreements with various places in Calcutta. They would open up their facilities for selling vegetables. We rented a van long term. We did not rent the van during COVID. That saved us some money. And essentially, the long and short of it is that they ended up having a very successful vegetable selling business. Now the vegetable prices post-COVID has been high. They're also selling in the villages. They're doing very well. And the number of women farmers has grown substantially from the time we started because the process is taking off. So these simple things, people won't give you money for it. But if these simple things can be done, then the education problem, curiosity problem, and the kids can be pulled in. We would not have been able to do this curiosity camp business if we didn't take care of all the other things. Because we had to get those women on board. They need to get their child to work with us. And the child is not necessarily going to listen if the mother is not on board. Anyway, so it's getting late. How then do we help the youth blossom as curious, creative, independent thinkers? Do we have a successful paradigm? This is the modern version of what Shujit has done, okay? So this is basically, it envisions the childhood and the adulthood as 2 separate universes separated by this liminal space. And this is a space when kids are innovative, they're extremely curious, they're problem solvers, but they're emotionally not adept at taking care of themselves. So this is also a place of high vulnerability, right? So the idea is to give them the skill sets on the right such that their vulnerability is minimized, such that they become emotionally mature, self-confident, good character, competent individuals. And this has been going around for a while. This has been around for the last decade or so. It's called positive youth development. And USAID has been using this model around the world, mostly Central America, South America, Africa, parts of Asia, and Europe as well. So it is a good model, but it's basically a polished up version of what Shujit has done. So wrapping up, I just want to summarize. There are a few points here. C.V. Raman was famous for his curiosity. This man was really curious. He was curious about why the ocean is blue. He came up with the first correct explanation of it. The explanation that was there at the time was not really correct. Raman effect remains the principal method for non-destructive chemical analysis of organic and inorganic compounds. Today, that many years later. Isn't that amazing? So the issue is this curiosity. What can we do to bring this curiosity, to allow this curiosity to blossom? Because then we'll have the scientists, then we'll have the mathematicians, then we'll have the engineers, then we'll have the creative people. And Indians are creative. Everybody knows that. So first thing that one needs to worry about is the principle of do no harm. This is a big principle in development space. If you are doing an experiment that can potentially harm somebody, you are not supposed to be doing it. It doesn't matter if it harms a little bit of people. All right? So one must not make mistakes, must not make big mistakes at least, when one's dealing with youth. There are 700,000 villages in India. India cannot survive without these villages. India is not a completely urban economy. It will never be. In fact, if it is, what will it eat? What will happen to its land? What will happen to its environment? So if you just look at it, obviously it's easy to see that it's unlikely to happen. So allowing our youth to become curious inventors, skilled workers who can run their own businesses, small businesses, nothing big, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, grocers, farmers. That's the model that I'm hoping we can get these kids to buy into in these rural areas that we are working in right now. And another very important point I touched upon is if the parents are not mentally healthy, if they are not secure, nothing's going to happen. Development cannot happen in vacuum as a laboratory experiment. It doesn't work like that. You're talking human beings. Electricity, by the way, is extremely expensive in rural India still. In all rural areas around the world, electricity is expensive, which is very, very strange. So a holistic approach is needed, as I said. Does that take a lot of money? No. It doesn't take a lot of money. Problem is that we give them a lot of money. We give them a lot of money, and we ask them to keep track of that money. They don't have the accounting system to keep track of $300,000. Forget $300,000. If you give them $20,000, they'll freak out because they probably need $500 from you for 2 months. And then they'll need $800 maybe later on after some vacation that they were taking after the period the school was closed. You don't know that. That's how these funders work. They throw the money, they expect the problem will be solved. And then they get ticked off when it doesn't get solved. Well, how will it get solved? If there is COVID, what will happen? If there is flood, what will happen? But that's reality, right? That's reality in our world. Why wouldn't that be the reality in their world? So at the end of the day, I claim that the money needed is very small. We are talking few $1,000s, less than $10,000 for most relatively effective pilot projects. Many communities don't even want your money because it is such a pain to keep track of things. It has happened to me. I tried to give them money for a project. They said, no, don't give us money. We don't want money now. We don't want that much money. We want this as a loan. Because they want whatever they're getting, they want it to be sustainable. They don't want to be dependent on you. Why would they want to be dependent on you? Working with teachers, community leaders, faith-based leaders, and government officials is absolutely important. You can't work in a vacuum. All of these people have to be partners. And freedom to experiment is a must. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you. And thanks to everybody in IIT Jodhpur for making this a fun stay for me. Thank you. You can ask me questions, if you have any. Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So the floor is now open for questions and yes, and comments.
Oh, there is one. Go ahead, and then we'll go to this lady there.
I work here. Hello. Many of my friends, or say friends of friends, I see, or say even in my neighborhood, I see that people go for some degree and then maybe sit at home unemployed, rather than going for a training of, say, becoming a carpenter, for example, and earning much more. So, how to break this mindset? This mainly probably comes from the societal pressure, or maybe the parents, but how to make say people realize this thing? Any suggestions on this?
Thank you for your question. It's a very important question. That's why I was emphasizing the point about community buy-in. It takes a village to raise a child. There is a phrase like that, right? There's a community buy-in aspect to it. So the community needs to realize also that it needs to sustain itself. If all the kids leave, then the community is not sustainable. That's one way of making that point clear, because the education part is very important, right? The other thing is that typically the kid who is going to college and getting a degree, many of these kids, they start out unfortunately handicapped anyway, because they come from schools where they may not have gotten the same kind of grounding. They may not have had exposure to the same coaching that others got. They were very bright, they did okay, but when it comes to a competition with everybody else, then they may not be the most favored candidate on many occasions. Of course, there are exceptions. So going to college, therefore, should be a very good option for those who really want to do it, but not because that's the only option. I think that's the thing that we are trying to hopefully improve when it comes to the work of the Kishore Kishori Bahini, when it comes to the work like Curiosity Camp, setting up libraries and so on, because we want to get these kids thinking. One problem that we have is we just kill their thinking, right? I mean, beyond the point, they don't talk, they don't vocalize, because they're very afraid that somebody will tell them something that will hurt them. I felt that way, I still feel that way half the time. So can you imagine what these kids feel most of the time? So that would be my thing. There's an educational part, there is also a community buy-in, family buy-in, that they need to realize the value of it. Because the dictum that getting a degree is a solution is actually the part of the problem. So that education, I don't know what you think, but that's my take on it. The microphone.
Yeah, so actually my concern was how to spread this thing. See, if I have to convey this to my friends' parents, suppose.
Right.
Or maybe, say, my neighbor's parents.
Right.
Then, how to convey this message to them? Because by the time I would convey, they would have already done a degree. And
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So this is a very big problem. That's the reason why I decided to focus on not 24 Parganas, on one area where we have been working for a long enough time to talk about these substantial changes that I was able to mention. So the only other way, unfortunately, is for each of us to try and do a little bit of what we can to be able to initiate these changes. Because you see, people are not going to make these changes because there's no business model that's going to help justify these changes. That model doesn't work. So why would you want to make a change? Why would you want to invest your time? Because you care, as simple as that. Because you care for these kids. I mean, unfortunately, modern education has made us into a very selfish society. Fundamentally, that's the problem, right? If we care, if we take the time to do a little bit when we can, not sacrificing our work or whatever, when we can, that alone is enough. That as a collective effect is enough. It won't happen overnight. It won't happen overnight. It will happen maybe in 20 years. If it does, that's great. That's why I said late 21st century, 22nd century. Because we can't speed this up. At least I know how, don't know how. I would love to, I don't know how. I mean, all these experiments that I told you about, all of them, Nilangshu, Rehan and I initiated, all of them. Every Sunday we meet on Zoom. And every Sunday we brainstorm what we can do. And what happened, and what didn't work, and what worked, and who said what. But you know, life is unpredictable in these environments. Just yesterday, for example, I was supposed to join them in school on Zoom. The school principal died in a road crash yesterday morning. It's now delayed by a good 15 days or 16 days. That's how life is in these areas. Because everything depends on one person, one thing. It's like that. Weak links that. So nothing will change soon. Doesn't matter. If we as a country can change another 50 years, my God, we'll be on top of the world. You look at these kids. You look at how incredibly smart they are. I told you that young girl who ended up in a brothel, she was asking me about pollution, global warming, dust, environment, what can we do, what about the cars? Who taught her what? She probably attended a few first, second, third grade, and then she was abandoned by her father. Mother died, I think. Father abandoned, father remarried, she ended up in a brothel. One of the uncles sold her off. That's what happened. What are you going to do? So I think the standards, unfortunately, are very different. And each of us will have to do our bit, because many of the NGOs don't really are able to manage, because you need this kind of penetration on the ground to be able to do things. People need to trust you. People need to like you. People need to know you're serious and you're not wasting their time. Because people are suspicious. They have been duped. No? That's part of the problem. I hope that answers. I know it's not an answer, but I try. I think there's a question. Sure.
I was wondering if am I audible?
Not really. Is she audible? I can't hear her.
No.
Sorry.
So I was wondering if our focus on early.
Yeah, that works.
So I was wondering if our focus on early achievements is counterproductive to the time it takes to explore and be curious. Because I feel like sometimes the conversation is always about all of these great people who did all of these great things early on and during their childhood, and it might be too late. And sometimes I wonder if we should also talk about the conversations of, these are those particular individuals. And there is a huge, so as you started out saying, that even until your 30s, you're kind of exploring, learning, curious. So is age and learning then, can we have a deeper conversation about this?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful question. You're so right. So my advisor, my PhD advisor, he passed away a few years ago at 79. It was very unfortunate. He had prostate cancer, he didn't know, and he found out at the very end. Now, he would be the only person in the world, I would think, who wouldn't know he had prostate cancer. Because all he knew was his rose garden and doing physics, and usually doing some very specific, complex mathematical calculations. So once I asked him, what's going on with you? You're like 76 years old. You seem to be more productive than you ever were. And his answer was, yes, I am. I'm a much better scholar now than I used to be in my 30s and 40s and 50s, when you were my student, for example. So people remain very creative, obviously if they nurtured themselves all their lives, number one. Number two, some people do great things at an early age, some people do great things at a much later age. I don't think that the jury is out in any significant scientific way on that score. And thirdly, I don't know, I mean, I have raised two girls. They're both normal humans so far. I think that each of them live in their own universes and live their own lives and go through their own realizations, and they have their own individual talents. And the way that grows is really unpredictable. So for us to characterize that is potentially problematic. So this early career thing, this, that, it's problematic. In fact, I don't personally like early career grants given to young faculty. Up to a point, it's a great encouragement, but it's equally important to keep them funded and going. Same with kids. It's very important to give them opportunities. If they don't fail, when will they learn? They have to fail. Every person who has done anything serious has done it because they have learned through the failures what to do. So we don't reward failures, right? We don't reward failures. I mean, I don't know. I used to teach a large class, physics freshman class, and I told my students that I'll only ask you questions that you won't be able to answer. Initially, I did that because I was very angry with them for reasons I won't get into. But I told them that. And guess what did they do? For every hard thing that I gave them, they did well because they were guessing what am I going to ask them. And they were studying what I was emphasizing. And they were inferring. They became better students. They got into med school. They got into dental school. And they themselves told me that. Otherwise, how would I know? So you see, this issue of challenging and failure, this has to be nurtured. I told them, I don't expect you to get 100%. Don't go for it. Get 60%. If you can consistently get 60%, you'll probably make an A. It was that difficult. And they did. 45% of the class would get an A. I never wrote any paper on it, but I did it for 14 years. So it was obviously working. This is the thing that we must allow them to make mistakes. I mean, these kids, the ones who are gardening, these juvenile delinquents, none of them looked at me, the older ones. They have real social anxiety. I asked the people who take care of them. So they have big problems in terms of personalities. But the gardening they do is impeccable. The work they do is amazing. One boy made a mistake, and the trainer told him, and he was not happy about it. And he had his standards. He wanted to get it right. So I think this is intrinsic to all of us. It's just that we have to change the paradigm in how we deal with these kids. We don't have the right to screw them up. That's the way I look at it. We don't have the right to screw them up. We assume that we do. And that is the problem. That's how the education system began. Even now in the US, science is taught alphabetically. Biology is taught first, chemistry is taught second, physics is taught third in high schools. This started in 1870. It hasn't changed. There are few states where it has changed. You may know more than I do, but few states. Illinois has changed, New York has changed, few states that have changed. Most schools you go to, you will see the same story going on. We are crazy. That's the problem. Sorry, I went on a diatribe.
Thank you so much.
I think I've put everybody to sleep. Very late.
Thank you. All right. So there are no more questions. Yes. All right. So in his treatise on education, entitled Emily, political philosopher Rousseau writes about how nurturing curiosity in children will help them to free themselves from the chains that humanity has bound itself into. But as Professor Sain's incisive and intricate talk has shown us, that nurturing curiosity is not only a matter of choice and or pedagogy, but it is also a matter of opportunity and privilege, and is greatly mediated by the socio-political environment and socio-political inequalities. Thank you so much, sir, for that wonderful talk. I now request Professor Neeraj Jain to kindly come on stage to present a memento to Professor Surojit Sen. Yeah.
Well, before I present this memento, I'd like to thank Professor Sen. After maybe nursery or something like that, how many of us have been told by our teacher, why do you ask that question that won't come in the exam? This is exactly what he is talking about. Don't kill the curiosity of a child. If you kill the curiosity, you have probably done a long-term harm to the growth of that child. That's number one. Number two, of course, is that as far as education is concerned, even at a school level, there are so many factors that go into a good education that many of us, particularly those who grew up in urban privileged background, cannot even imagine. There is a data, and which was presented today, that girl child drops out of the school because there is a no girl toilet for grown-up girls in many schools of villages. As little thing as that, and there has been data about how building a girl child toilet, I'm not talking of handicapped girl, I'm talking of a normal, healthy girl. If you build a toilet, you increase the percentage of children who actually pass high school. So this is a very complex social issues, but as Professor Sen said, all of us have to contribute. We have to take out our time. We are privileged to reach this level, either doing bachelor's or master's or PhDs or teaching in an institute like IIT. But I think if each one of us gives few minutes, few hours every month, that'll make a difference. Thank you very much for bringing up all these important issues.
Okay. Yes. We'd also like to thank Professor Kuldeep Singh, who is not here right now, for being for gracing us with his attendance. Thank you so much again. I would now request Professor Gaurav Bhatnagar, Associate Dean, International Relations, IIT Jodhpur, to kindly come on stage to give vote of thanks. Yeah.
A very good evening to all of you. I feel honored and privileged to get the opportunity to propose the vote of thanks on this special occasion of the National Science Day. So on behalf of the Institute, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guests, Professor Surjit Sen and Professor Kuldeep Singh, who blessed the occasion with their presence. Going forward, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Shantanu Chaudhary, Director IIT Jodhpur, for his constant support and guidance. I also thank Professor Sampatraj Vadera, Deputy Director, Professor Kamaljeet Rangra, and the entire team for their tireless effort in organizing the event. We are also thankful to all the faculty members and the staff colleagues who helped us with required arrangement in organizing this event. We would also like to thank our student volunteers for being active player in organizing this particular event. It is too late, so I will not take much time of yours. So without further ado, on behalf of the Institute, I am thankful to you all, and I wish you all a great evening ahead. Thank you very much.